Hello, everybody. I hope we're having a great day today. Today, we will be discussing the evidence based principles behind weight training, specifically for the goal of maximizing muscle growth. In this case, evidence based meaning the combination of scientific, logical, and anecdotal evidence. The primary reason I personally go about teaching that way is because we do not know everything scientifically yet. The info that is not conclusive scientifically has to have the gaps filled in with reason and anecdotal evidence. These forms of evidence may be less valuable in many cases, but they absolutely have their place within the hierarchy of evidence. And before going over anything that needs further than surface level explanation, I must address and stress the most important principle of them all: adherence. All of info to come is only as useful to how much it is consistently adhered to. Now, before I go on, I got this idea primarily from Eric Helms. He has the concept up on his website called the Strength Pyramid, and it's basically his version of the hierarchy of importance of training principles and just principles in general for putting on size. And at the bottom of the pyramid, or the most important part of the pyramid, is adherence. So I just want to give him credit for that. But yes, it's a very logical conclusion to come to. Um, okay. So all of the info to come, like I said, is only as useful as to how much it is consistently adhered to. So for a simple hypothetical, there are two versions of your future self in a year from now. Both had the goal of building a lot of muscle. The first version is consistent with the training plan, diet, and has relatively low stress while sleeping 7 to 9 hours a night. The second version misses training sessions often, ignores the diet plan frequently, pulls too many late nights on the weekends, and procrastinates, causing a chronically higher stress level as a result. Who grew more muscle? Well, without any background knowledge, the right answer is probably pretty easy for you to guess. And yes, this video will be focused on maximizing muscle growth, but for those who don't have the time or want to give that goal close to 100%, but still want appreciable gains in the process, principles will be given for you as well for a few of these core topics to shorten up on time. So, what creates the initial trigger of muscle growth? Mechanical tension. Mechanical tension, referred to in exercise science, is the force or load placed on muscles during resistance training, which is considered a primary driver for muscle hypertrophy, or simply put, muscle growth. The tension is created when muscles contract, lengthening or shortening against their resistance, and it stimulates anabolic pathways that lead to protein synthesis and muscle growth. Now, this is a quote from Gemini, Google AI. I just didn't think it was necessary to have my own definition here. I think a very general definition serves its purpose and gets the point across very well. Um, and just for a further notice before we get into any of the big principles, I just want to say we will not delve into any of the proposed or proven physiological mechanisms or pathways here on any given topics. But having the basis of knowledge on what causes exercise induced muscle growth or primarily causes exercise induced muscle growth, I think it's just useful to know. So, how do we put a greater dose of mechanical tension on our muscles to grow them more? Well, now it's time to talk about the primary resistance training principles. The first that I want to introduce is the concept of intensity. So, in this case, all that means is how hard a set is. Um, how do you measure how hard to go, and how hard should the set be? So for measuring intensity, we use a term called RIR, which stands for reps in reserve. RIR is basically the perceived reps away from muscular failure as gauged by the exerciser performing that exercise. So if somebody claims they did a set of 5 reps on bench press, for example, with 2 RIR or 2 reps in reserve, that would mean they left 2 reps in the tank and believe they could have gotten 2 more reps on top of the 5 reps they did if they tried them within that set. A set of 5 reps with 2 reps in reserve means they should have gotten 7 reps if they left 0 reps in the tank. Now, you may be questioning, how accurate is this concept of perceived RIR? Are we good at judging how close we are to muscular failure or a max effort set? Well, it turns out, yes, we are. We are pretty decently good at it, for the most part. A 2021 meta-analysis by Halperin et al. Found that trainees tend to undershoot RIR by 1. To be precise, it was more like 0.95. And are much worse at predicting sets that are greater than or equal to 12 reps per set. So if you believe your last set of bicep curls was 1 reps in reserve, it's likely it was truly a 2 rep in reserve set. But is this even a big deal? No, not at all, and you'll shortly see why. Now, that we understand the concept of perceived reps in reserve to gauge set intensity, at what rep in reserve should we train at to get the best growth stimulus? Well, a 2024 series of meta-regressions by Robinson et al. Found that there is a positive dose-response relationship of estimated proximity to failure on muscle growth. Does this mean we should take every set to absolute muscular failure? No, absolutely not. This response was linear in nature, and the mean difference in response from 2 reps in reserve to 0 reps in reserve was not large at all. To further answer the question of why we should not train every set to muscular failure, we must introduce another training principle first, and I will tackle that question later on, and you will see why I have to introduce this next variable. So next one is training volume. So what is training volume? It is the fractional measurement of the number of sets completed on a given muscle, the entire body, during a week, or during a session of training. Fractional, in this case, meaning that secondary or indirect stimuli, for example, the triceps in the bench press or the biceps in the pull down variations, are counted as a fraction and not as one whole unit of stimulus. This makes it so we do not dismiss indirect stimulus, and so it's more accurate than counting it as one full set of stimulus for that muscle. For example, if volume is counted fractionally, 5 sets of bench press would count as 5 sets for the chest and 2.5 sets for the triceps. This is because the chest is the primary mover in the bench press, while the triceps are secondary or not the primary target of the exercise, but they certainly do contribute to the exercise. Granted, it's probably more complicated than that to just count it as 0.5. But for heuristic sake, we will count it for 0.5, and that is generally how the literature does count it as well. But what we are focused on specifically in the talk of volume is per muscle volume, specifically weekly and per session training volume as it relates to muscle growth. So for weekly volume, we have a meta-regression by Pelland et al. That found a positive dose-response relationship with muscle growth measured up to greater than 40 fractional sets per week. For per session volume, we have a meta-regression by Remert et al. That also found a positive dose-response relationship with muscle growth measured up to 25 fractional sets per session. So does that mean we should train 25 sets a session per muscle and 50 sets per muscle per week? No, absolutely not. Give it a try, maybe don't. I do not recommend doing that. I don't want you guys to get rhabdomyolysis or anything like that. So first of all, we have lives outside of this hobby unless we are high-earning professional bodybuilders. Secondly, both of these dose-response relationships have diminishing returns and less statistical confidence in the high-volume ranges. And in regards to the diminishing returns, in the Remert paper, heavy diminishing returns start to occur at roughly 11 fractional sets per session. And in the Pelland et al. Paper, heavy diminishing returns past 20 and especially past 30 fractional sets per week have great diminishing returns. So the ROI, or the return on investment, as us business folks like to say, past those landmarks is typically not worth the time commitment anymore in most cases. In regards to statistical confidence, in the Pelland et al. Meta-regression, the number of samples that measured greater than 20 fractional sets per week, and even more so, greater than 30 fractional sets, was much less than the number of studies compiled that did research on less than 20 fractional sets per week. A similar thing occurred in the Remmert et al. Meta-regression on per session training volume. Having less data on the higher volume ranges means we are less confident in those meta-analytical findings within those ranges. With a larger sample of studies on higher volumes in the future, we may indeed find a flat line in benefit, even worse diminishing returns than shown currently, or even a larger benefit than shown right now. We just don't know fully conclusively yet, and that's just the nature of scientific evidence, sadly. We can't just have all the knowledge in the world immediately. It requires time. Okay, so a quick review of volume and intensity and its practical application. So what do we do with this newfound knowledge of volume and intensity? For volume, I recommend going up to 11 fractional sets per session and 20 to 30 fractional sets per week per muscle. 11 sets per session to avoid steep diminishing returns, and the same can be said for the 20 to 30 recommendation for weekly volume. I also do recommend a training frequency, specifically in this case meaning the number of times a specific muscle is stimulated per week at 2 or 3 times a week. So if you want to say hit your biceps, I would recommend training your biceps 3 times per week. Maybe one time on Monday, one time on Wednesday, and then one time on Saturday for 3 times per week. With 3 times per week, if you want to get closer to 30 fractional sets per week, probably because it's better if we just split that volume up, having the high per session volume makes that volume a bit less stimulatory than if it was just spread out across more days, as shown by the Remmert et al. Paper. Splitting up the volume throughout multiple sessions can be a way to make those high weekly landmarks more effective by avoiding those per session diminishing returns. With intensity, I recommend sticking to a perceived reps in reserve of 2 to 0 reps in reserve, so 2 to 0. The reason I don't recommend going to muscular failure is because of fatigue accumulation. Generally speaking, fatigue from exercise is not something to worry about, but when we are shooting for close to maximally effective volume landmarks, if every single one of those sets were taken to failure, the training sessions would be brutally difficult and tiresome. For example, as an experienced trainee, a set of squats with 2 reps in reserve is light years easier and less tiring than a set of squats taken to muscular failure. Also, per set injury risk likely increases the more intense the set is. So, if we're getting a small benefit for going to failure versus 2, let alone 0 reps in reserve, for the cost of dreading a brutally difficult workout, a potentially higher risk of injury, and total fatigue accumulation being much higher, that is not a trade I'm willing to make as a trainee and a trainer. It is an overall loss when striving for those higher volumes, which we know to be highly beneficial for growth. So, for those who don't want, and this is for the people that do not want to rack up a lot of time in the gym and do not necessarily care about maximizing muscle growth, for volume, I recommend 4 fractional sets per muscle per week. This is enough to create meaningful gains, according to the Pelland et al. Meta-analysis on weekly volume. And intensity, I generally give you the same recommendation, but if volume is that much lower, which it is a lot lower, 4 fractional sets per week is really not that much. It's very easy to get done for many people, even very, very busy people. Going to muscular failure often can be considered to make each set marginally more effective. Remember, in this case, the cost is not nearly as bad because the volume is so much lower. And for training frequency, I would recommend the same as the maximization strategy, trying to stay around the 2 to 3 sessions per week per muscle. Okay, so now that's volume and intensity. For exercise selection, as long as dynamic movements or exercises that lengthen and shorten the target muscle under tension and not isometric movements, maintaining the same muscle length under tension, for example, like a static stretch, as well as exercises that target the muscle's primary functions are being done in effort to grow, you are likely doing everything close to correct as far as exercise selection goes. We do have evidence saying choosing exercises that put a muscle through a larger stretch and having more tension in that stretch can produce more growth than exercises that don't. However, this has only been found to occur in untrained lifters. For trained lifters or experienced lifters, this phenomenon has not really been confidently found yet. And for tempo and technique, regarding tempo specifically, as long as a rep takes 2 to 8 seconds, you're getting a maximally effective stimulus per rep. So, for example, in the bicep curl, I'm seated. As long as the positive, or what's scientifically called the concentric, and the negative, or what's scientifically called the eccentric, takes in the range combined 2 to 8 seconds, that's all you have to worry about with tempo. It's not that complicated. Now, talking about technique, you may be asking if sets should be performed strictly. No momentum, only focusing on the target muscle's function, slow eccentric, pausing in the stretch, or with a cheat technique as you may have heard, or which is usually regards momentum and heaving. A recent paper says it probably doesn't really matter. However, for tracking progressive overload, strict technique is likely superior. But what is progressive overload? Now, this is a training principle that involves gradually increasing the stress placed on the body over time to promote adaptations such as increased strength, muscle mass, and endurance. For our purposes, we are focusing on how this relates to muscle mass. Examples of this occurring in our focus is increasing the weight within the same rep and intensity target. So going from 225 pounds for 5 at 2 reps in reserve to 230 pounds for 5 at 2 reps in reserve. Or increasing reps within the same weight and intensity target. So 225 for 5 at 2 reps in reserve to 225 for 6 at 2 reps in reserve. The first one went up 5 pounds, same reps in reserve, same reps. The second example went up a rep at the same reps in reserve and the same weight. Are either of these methods for progression better than the other, though? 2 papers, specifically one by Chavez et al. And another by Plotkin et al., found that either strategy is highly viable and they promote essentially the same or similar adaptations. Now remember to always aim for progression in either reps or load. It's okay for the reps or weight to not go up every week. This is especially common in well-trained or experienced lifters, as gains just happen to slow over time. That's just the nature of the game and the nature of our biology. But if progression can be made, shoot for it. Absolutely shoot for it. I highly recommend also keeping a training log, which is just something that lets you track your exercises, the number of sets for those exercises, and the weight/reps moved for those sets, and of course, the day they were performed. This is useful because it gives you data on if you have been progressing over time. If you notice over the span of months you haven't been progressing, that is a key indicator that something in or outside of the gym is going wrong and keeping that from happening. Knowing so lets you judge what you could be doing wrong sooner, or even just make you aware something is indeed going wrong, allowing you to get back on the ideal path of gains sooner. Okay, back to cheat reps. Now, and how they are messy, specifically with tracking progression, as we just went over. Cheat reps make tracking sets more difficult and potentially even less honest, if you will. For example, if you do a set of standing bicep curls and you are heaving the weight around the entire set, how many reps did you do? On face value, it seems like an easy question to answer, but since the nature of cheating relies on heaving and momentum, how can you possibly standardize that set? If the momentum increases as the set progresses, you're cheating the reps more and more, so you do not know how many reps you were truly capable of doing. Whereas with strict technique, the set hits failure when the muscle itself cannot perform another rep, not because of momentum being unable to help anymore. This better shows what your muscle is actually capable of and gives a better representation of true strength progression, letting you accurately gauge if your muscles are progressing, not your ego, by heaving weights you have absolutely no business touching. Okay, on the topic of rest times, a meta-analysis by Singer et al. Found that 1 minute and 30 seconds, or in the range of 1 to 2 minutes, was ideal for time efficiency without compromising gains. Higher rest times elicited similar gains, lower rest times gave slightly worse gains. However, around 1 minute and 30 seconds seems to be that sweet spot. This is not the most important variable at all, so in most cases, there's no need to track a rest time unless time is of importance for you. Just go when you feel ready and you're likely fine. No need to sweat this. Now, what are the ideal rep ranges for muscle growth? 5 to 30 repetition sets provide equal muscle growth, assuming intensity is the same when comparing different ranges. For example, a set of 5 at 0 reps in reserve will grow you just as much as a set of 20 at 0 reps in reserve. But reps in reserve becomes harder to predict as sets go past 12, according to the previously mentioned Halperin et al. Study. So I recommend staying in the 5 to 12 rep range most of the time, and greater than 12 reps if you're looking to avoid aggravating an injury or just generally injury prone or do not at all want injury risk being a factor involved. Okay, with all this newfound knowledge, what is an effective way to cut down on workout time without sacrificing gains? Because as we mentioned, training volume is a very important variable, and it also is what is going to take up the most time in the gym because you have to accumulate those sets. So if we come up with strategies that help you cut up on time, those can help people who are maximizing get out of the gym sooner, and those who aren't even get out of the gym sooner, even though they probably won't be there long to begin with. So one strategy is called non-overlapping and antagonistic supersets, which is a conventional set followed promptly after by another set. However, both of those sets target different muscles. For example, a good superset would be bicep curls into tricep pushdowns or leg extensions into leg curls. However, I would not recommend the strategy with heavy leg compound movements, as this would be incredibly fatiguing and difficult to do, potentially compromising performance with your supersetted exercises. I would say all upper body exercises should be fine to superset with, as well as lower body isolation exercises. According to this Burke et al. Paper, superset training provided similar adaptations to normal resistance training, but in roughly 36% less time than the normal resistance training group. Whereas this systematic review by Zhang et al., I do have all the references linked, by the way, goes a bit more in depth on the subject if you're interested to see the nuances of superset training. And even a more simple way to cut down on workout time is sticking primarily to stack-loaded machines and cables as well as dumbbells. These exercises that use this equipment require essentially no setup time, allowing you to plug and play, so to speak. Using a barbell or Smith machine can be time-consuming, stripping or loading the plates, impacting how long you're in and out of the gym. Now, I got that idea also from another doctor. I mentioned Dr. Eric Helms earlier. The idea of sticking to dumbbells and plate-loaded and stack-loaded machines came from Dr. Milo Wolf. He posted this in one of his recent videos, and it was ingenious, very simple, but very straightforward as well. So I just want to give him kudos. Okay, with everything now out of the way, what could an example program using these principles look like? I do have linked in the description, if you guys would like to see, a sample torso limbs routine. What that entails is basically torso day. It does sound goofy. You guys probably not have heard it. Is basically chest, back, and I believe shoulders. You can put shoulders, I think, wherever you want. It doesn't matter. But as long as it includes chest or back, that's generally what's considered a torso day. And then limb day is exactly as it sounds, a combination of arms, so bis, tris, and legs, quads, hamstrings, adductors, the glute complex, calves, all that stuff. Um, you can throw, like I said, throwing shoulders wherever. I will say the limb day likely does take up a lot of time just because leg training typically requires a bit more rest time. Not because that's necessary, but just because that's what most trainees do because it's very fatiguing. So I would recommend keeping the side delt training or just general delt training to your torso day. So if you want to take a break and pause this video and take a look at that pretty close to ideal program using the recent literature, um, take a peek. It would be a highly effective program to follow if prioritizing all the most important muscle groups in the body is the goal. These volume landmarks match up with what is likely ideal or close to it, but the volume can easily be lowered to 4 fractional sets per muscle group if time efficiency is a heavy want, and maximum gains aren't necessarily. And just to state in case if it's not already clear, anywhere between 4 and 30 fractional sets per week per muscle can also be done. That is a huge range. If you don't want to spend a lot of time in the gym doing 20 to 30 fractional sets per muscle and don't also want to do the bare minimum, anywhere in between will yield better gains than 4 fractional sets per week and a little worse gains than 20 to 30 fractional sets per week. A sweet spot, if maximization isn't a want and the bare minimum isn't either, is 10 to 20 fractional sets per muscle per week. That landmark is easily attainable and rather time efficient for the net reward, especially if supersets are implemented and you stick to dumbbell and stack loaded machine movements. You can, of course, go between 10 and 4 fractional sets per week too. Anyways, peeps, thank you so much for your time, and I hope this served as a valuable resource for your own muscle gain goals. If you have any questions, leave a comment, and this is the summation of my capstone project.